This is episode 2 of season 2 of Diversity Stories, a podcast by Studium Generale ArtEZ. Hi Mel.
Hi.
So what do we have this episode?
This month there's only one item, an interview with Stefan Kaegi, who is an artist who's part of the Rimini Protokoll, which is a label based in Germany for 3 artists.
And these 3 artists are Stefan Kaegi, Helgard, Haug, and Daniel Wetzel. And they work in the realm of theater, sound, and radio plays, but they also make film and installations. They produced an impressive amount of works of art, for which they have won many prizes. Stefan Kaegi is interviewed by Janet Schreurs, Barbara Braniff, and Lotte Wandel, which I all know because they are students at IME, the International Master Artist Educator. Lotte now works at the Masters, and she was a student 2 years ago. Here it is.
Let's go.
So here we are.
Yeah.
Maybe it's good to quickly start with introducing ourselves. Well, we're here with Janet Schreurs and with Barbara Braniff. They're both students from the International Master Artist Educator.
Yes.
And myself, Lotte Wandel. I am a graduate from the Master Artist Educator. And I'm now working at the program. And for this podcast, maybe it would be very interesting if you could maybe first introduce yourself and a bit more, and the Rimini Protokoll.
Well, I'm Stefan Kaegi, and I actually, my first job when I left school was a journalist, and I think some of that urge to represent the world out there still is there, but I changed the medium. I try to let the outside come in to the world of theater through different kind of formats, I guess, that we developed together with my collective Rimini Protokoll, based in Berlin. And those formats always relate to theater in terms that they are worked within time, or they have a certain dramaturgy, and they're often about narration, but then people come and say, oh, it's a bit more of visual arts or other things, and they might be right as well, but we kind of insist on the term of theater because we believe that we can still expand what that is.
And the theme of Studium Generale today, and I think this term is home. So my question is, what does home mean to you, or not being home?
Well, not being home is more familiar to me than being home, because I think it was when I was 25 or so, and I had just finished my studies, and I started kind of getting invitations to do things on small little festivals here and there, and it would get me a little bit of money, but not enough to pay both my survival and my rent. So I decided I'll just give up my flat. And sell everything I had, except for some rests and 22 kilos that I would carry along. And then from then on, I kind of stayed within whatever those little, youngsters festivals or ever could offer me as residencies when I worked somewhere during some weeks or a month. And then I always stayed in those guest flats or sometimes Germany, there. Or? No, I quite soon started to be more international as well. I had always a strong relationship to South America. I lived there in Brazil when I was 16 the first time, and I did a big number of works there, but also one of my early destinations I for some reason got invited to make something was Poland. No, it was Krakow actually first. And so I thought that this would be my nomadic existence during half a year or maybe a year, but then the year was over and the situation hadn't really changed, and there were a lot of still other invitations to go elsewhere, but still not lots of money. And so I kind of got used to this, and I stayed nomadic for 8 years.
So
basically having
Sorry
one.
to interrupt you.
Yeah.
So no home? For
Yeah, I
8
really. Yeah, I had a place to sleep wherever I wasn't really homeless in that sense, but I always organized myself from week to week, or often I would know half a year before, but kind of always new homes, I would say, temporary places, and I always one pair of shoes and 2 pairs of trousers and 1 book or maybe 2 books, and if somebody came and gave me a new book, I had to kind of give away the one before, so that I could kind of keep it transportable.
Wow. The main theme of today, or besides home, is the question of how to approach and welcome the other. And I would be very curious what the relation of the approach and welcoming the other is to your work and the work of Rimini Protokoll. I'm not sure if I need to split the two into your work and the work of the Rimini Protokoll, or if all the work you do is. But for now, I just keep it into both. But yeah.
Well, I mean, welcoming the other is a very broad term. I guess I don't know. Does it refer back to Lacan, or does it only refer to refugees? I would say. In our work, what welcoming the other could translate into often is that we, at least when we started working, the stage was a place kind of reserved for people that had passed an education as actors or dancers or singers, musicians or whatever. And we started quite soon to work with people that were unfamiliar with that space. Which partly was just out of the fact that we were studying in Gießen, where there is no actor's career actually as well, but it also was kind of a commitment from the beginning, because as I said, taking journalism into the world of theater, it wasn't, the idea behind it wasn't to kind of translate whatever we would find in our research into writing and then giving the writing to the actors. We felt like we should invite more immediate formats that would allow the other. It sounds kind of scary, the other to have a voice themselves there on those stages. Yeah. And then, I mean, another strategy, I guess, in our work has always also been not to invite the other to the theater, but rather take audiences to places where they would experience something other than what they would normally be in. For instance, I was talking about the truck project, which is going on for a long while now already, where we take audiences kind of seated in a theater style, and we come to places that then are transformed by this, what you could call a ready-made machine for stages, into, they become kind of the scenographies of our performances, where unforeseen things often happen in combination with foreseen things.
Must be exciting.
Actually saw one of your plays in Berlin, Remote Mitte. I really enjoyed it. I just wanted to say that. Yeah,
that will be also in that line of kind of direction, taking people to places. I mean, when I was small, I was a Boy Scout, and I guess some of this always remains in my work, to kind of do those treasure hunts or kind of organize sequences of things for groups of people that kind of combine, I guess, also simple structures of entertainment with kind of information, I would say.
And apart from the foreseen and the unforeseen part in the work and the interactive part of the work, is there some sort of main theme, or are there main themes which really interest you and which you try to put in the work, or to use as a base for new works? Is there some sort of core?
Well, our works are often quite content-driven, but the contents are really have a big variety. If I try to... I mean, there are, I guess, kind of leitmotifs that come back. One of them is diplomacy. kind of how is the representation of states towards the outside has been we've been busy for a longer while with this. Politics was often a project, our very first project that we did together really under the name of Rimini Protokoll was Deutschland 2, where we kind of made citizens reenact political speeches or actually lively enact while they were happening in Berlin those performances were in Bonn, in the kind of ex-capital, and the idea was to kind of bring back those political speeches into the voters' bodies or throats or in a certain way. But in the recent year, I would say, in a way, parallelly to the world becoming more and more driven rather by economical players than by political players, I guess a lot of our project ask questions about the economical circumstances or what globalization and capitalism kind of do to biographies or to how they make us collaborate and how they transform our democracies.
You just mentioned globalization, and today before I also heard you saying globalization, and the other day I've also been watching 100% Amsterdam. And as I'm aware of, there are so many more plays of this 100% city play. So I'm curious if you could maybe tell a bit more about the theme of globalization and what it means to you, and because it is something which seems to come back, and I'm not sure if I interpreted this right, but.
Well, on one simple level, I think it's a problem that we all kind of suffer from, and I kind of hope that's one that will be sorted out in the next 50 years. Is that politics are kind of running behind the big economical players. Last year we made a project called World Weltzustand Davos, which is about the World Economic Summit that happens every January in the Swiss mountains, and it's a kind of a emblematic place for this state of the world. It's a place where I think 5,000 top shots from the private industry come together, and they make sure that they're only the top shots by you have to pay an entrance fee into this which is 100,000 euro about, and then they invite politicians to come around, and on the surface and on the official website that was communicates that it's to sort out the problems of the world, to look forward, to see where does the fourth industrial revolution take us to, what are the new skills that managers need to have, how to tackle gender balance issues within the boards of companies and governance. But meanwhile, there's a lot of lobbyism happening, and the state leaders basically go there to, especially the ones from the southern side of the world, to kind of say, we are stable, please invest in our countries. And that's kind of a repetitive figure that comes back and back in different industries and politics there. I did another project about the construction industry, and if you go to the MIPIM, that's the biggest fair for investors, where cities go and kind of try to attract money, in this case for big construction projects, infrastructure projects. And there you see, well, in a certain way, politicians on their knees in front of the people that have the money in their hand. Yeah. And they don't know the foreign border. So like if we talk about borders this morning, we heard the borderless project, then we always think, how to go beyond the legal situation, but obviously those companies, they just do it, and the Netherlands are a place that you are familiar with, what tax evasion can produce in the positive sense for your country and the negative sense in other countries. That on the first level, when it comes to the topic, I mean, we ourselves work very globally, which has kind of developed in that direction. In a way, how we like to think for many of our projects, but not all of them actually, they're hopefully as different as possible, so they don't all gather under one umbrella. But in one line of work, we've been trying to develop strategies how touring performance wouldn't necessarily mean to ship containers full of stage design, to fly big ensembles of people, and then perform 1, 2, 3 days in a place, get the applause, and move out again. Because those kind of touring theater companies, as most of the touring was done in the 90s and in the 0 years, is not very ecologically friendly. It spends most of the money on tickets for airlines and expedition companies. So we try to invent, and you quoted one of them, projects like 100% or remote as well, where actually a small number of people is traveling, but then stay for longer, and together with local dramaturgs or producers, or kind of we try to reinvent the project on the spot. So what actually travels is the idea, and not the set design, or not the...
So it's like a formula, finished
formula? In a way, well...
Because technically speaking, you don't have to be there each time, right? You can give that formula to someone. Normally,
it still depends on 1 or 2 or 3 of us traveling, but not not 100 people traveling. But what you see on stage is basically the 100 people that are from the city. There's a local band that is from the city that plays, and there are designers and technicians and people involved.
Do one of you guys orchestrate it?
Yeah, but we are there to kind of coordinate the process and to make it happen in the last 2 or 3 weeks. But it depends on the process, which is, I don't know how familiar you are with this project. It basically tries to find a representative sample of 100 people that are like the city in terms of age, gender, migration background, neighborhood where they live in, and I forgot one, civil state. So this representative sample is found and identified by a rule, and there, yes, we just send an instruction more or less, but it's done, this casting process, by a local person, because obviously they're much better in finding those people.
And how do you curate the stories or the narratives, and which eventually end up in the play? Is there a certain...
Well, I would, again, those things are not formulas that I could, I'd love to program an algorithm that can replace myself, but in some of it is in the end classical theater making, and kind of finding out what is a good story and how can it be told in a way that it doesn't just talk, but it also gives you maybe a central reason to identify with it or find it interesting or contrast with it, and how to create those conflicts that you need in classical drama in the end as well. But I mean, the formula thing, it kind of is a question that still haunts me, because it there used to be, or there still are, all of these playwrights. I'm from Switzerland. The most successful playwright ever, like Dürrenmatt and The Visit of the Old Lady, or I don't know how that translates into English, but that's there. This play, it's the most performed play from Switzerland still every year. And it's kind of, okay, this text touring, and then in whatever, Malaysia or Japan, they do their own staging of it. And in a way, I think that's not so bad to have something that kind of gives us a common ground to speak about in other places. But theater today has understood, I think, widely that it's not the slave of the text only. And so how do we now reformulate when we invent concepts in something that is transportable and still has the quality that we want it to have?
Because I had another question about 100% Amsterdam. I guess in the play you guys wanted to show the faces behind the statistics, right?
Yeah, could say that, yeah.
But while watching the play, I watched it online. I noticed that a lot of it is still statistics, but what were moments for you in the play where the statistics got faces or became more personal?
Well, it is. It shows statistics, but it's well. First of all, the official statistics are just those 5 categories that I mentioned, defining who is on stage. But then, from then on, all questions we ask, we don't know what would be the official statistics. There might be numbers for some of them. How many bicycles do people have, or how many unemployed there are, and potentially, hopefully, our numbers on stage are kind of similar to the official numbers. But then we ask a lot of questions where there are no statistics about who has cheated on their partner, or who openly is willing to stand out as gay in front of an audience, or who has lied tonight. Or these are questions that kind of create their own more thing through liveness. And on the other hand, I think the main come up of the faces from the numbers is that you follow the person who says, yes, he has smoked joints, yes, he now is with the people who would like to live elsewhere, and then he's also been a soldier, and wow, how does that combine with and everybody does it in his own way, either because they know somebody on stage, or they kind of hook up to one figure because they think that's more or less my category, and then they're surprised, but here she answers differently from me, and so hopefully everybody coming out at the end of the show, they will have a different have seen different things, different scenes. It really depends very much on each performance, because certain topics bring along certain performances, and then on the places where we perform. So the one you saw, Remote Berlin, it has, I don't know, it's kind of a the more we're performing, the more audience there is, and I think it is reaching out to a lot of people that wouldn't go to the theater. And I talked to some, one day I went back to see it again after a while, and I talked to some younger crowd that were there, and they kind of, when I asked them, why did you come to this piece of theater, they were like, what? Piece of theater? And they didn't think of it as theater at all, and like they I don't know, they thought of it more as a game or as a harm thing, which it also a little bit is, and in the end it doesn't. So that's very specific to this project, but my very recent work with this, I quickly mentioned it, the humanoid robot that we constructed. It is a collaboration with an author, and this author kind of, that's a totally new thing for me. I never worked with somebody that is coming from literature, but he is kind of a known character in Germany, and actually his book has been translated into Dutch as well, The World in My Back. And he brings again then a certain more literature-driven maybe audience. When we did this piece about Davos, we had a lot of people from international organizations that are interested in those topics. What's the United Nations doing, and what's the private stakeholders doing to improve the state of the world, as is the official terminology that Davos is talked about. And then we did once a play about court cases, and we had a lot of lawyers coming, and sometimes, I'm sure the piece that Helgard and Daniel, my two colleagues, did in Istanbul with garbage collectors, when they showed it in Berlin, I think it brought a lot of the Turkish community together as well.
It's funny because when I did the Remote Mitte one, there was this French couple, and at the end they were like, "Oh, that was really cool, like a tour, like a tourist."
A tour,
They thought it was like a Berlin tour. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, yes.
Well, on one hand it is. It's just not telling you what the sightseeing spots are or what's the history of it. It tells you more what is the potential of those places, or what could it be elsewhere. Then obviously it's about artificial intelligence and about the kind of horde behaviors and all of this.
And to what extent is your work scripted, or where is there space for the unknown? How do these things scripted and the unknown? How is the balance, or how do you work with that?
Yeah, again, it's super different from piece to piece. I mean, remote, when you look at this, everything in the audio side is very scripted because it's all pre-recorded, and you kind of have the feeling that it's kind of augmented reality driven, but it's not really. It's kind of some guys with MP3 players triggering the right sound file in the right moment, so that the sound
with the traffic
is...
lights. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
But it's all pre-recorded, so there's no improvisation on that level, just on the speed. Like when there are kids with it, then it goes a bit faster, and when the red light is red for a long while, then it goes a bit slower. But everything you see is totally non-rehearsed, so I don't know, when you stand in the moment, there's a moment where you stand in the central station, and the voice tells you to look one way, and everybody's kind of lining up as if it was an audience space, and the most weird and seemingly rehearsed things happen. I don't know what happened when you watched it there, but
we faced the station with our back, but everyone was standing somewhere else on the square, and then the audio told us to walk towards the station, but since we were facing the station with our backs, and we started walking backwards.
Yeah. No, but that is, I mean, that's scripted, so that's supposed to happen every time. But later, when you go up the stairs, there is a moment where you stand still, and before the clapping, there is this moment where basically you just look, and there's always a lot going on because it's a busy place.
Taking pictures of us.
Okay, so things like this can happen one day, and the next day they don't happen, and then sometimes there is somebody talking on the phone in front of it and kind of being shocked and not knowing, and other days they're not. So there's a lot of space for the unknown on that side, and when it's raining there are different audio tracks being triggered than when if not, and sometimes. But the piece with the robot, actually, it's really 100% totally finished and scripted. Every move he does with his hand is the very same. Hopefully, I hope that if not, something is broken. And then there are others where the truck drivers, they need to improvise a lot because in traffic jams they kind of need to and it's nice to hear them improvising because a lot of, I don't know, swear words come out of them, like kind of, which I would never script, but kind of they tell something about them.
It's human.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very curious because it seems like in many places the audience or the people involved are actually more participants rather than spectators. Is there some sort of idea behind this? Why you're doing this, or why people make into participants rather than passive spectators?
You know, I don't know how the Dutch word for playing theater is spelen or something like that. Yeah. And so it's the same word as in German. And play, in a way, it to me implies that you're playing something together. I don't know why it has kind of developed in the Baroque times in such a way that it would be vorspielen, actually. I don't know if the same word.
Voorspelen.
Yeah.
Voordragen.
And because that's not a spielen in that sense for me. Mm-hmm. Having said that, I often also go to see frontal plays, and some of them are really good. I see stuff. I'm not ideological about that. This should be the only way performance should happen. But I guess we have developed, since Lessing had his moment when he wrote his Hamburger Dramaturgie. I don't know if you've studied that, but it kind of, he invented this term. Theater is a moral institution. Mm-hmm. That was when 18th century maybe. And the idea of the Enlightenment back then was Enlightenment, is it? Yeah, the siècle des Lumières, the Aufklärung, or what's the it is. Enlightenment times was that the audience is in German, unmündige Menge, like a basic stupid crowd, and they need to be enlightened by the guys up there that know things, and that was very much like the way Goethe thought, and the kind of. And I think that top-down approach is really not our time anymore. I mean, when I stopped wanting to be a journalist because I didn't like the one-way medium, and I didn't like some other problems involved, the short times we had to. But this one-way system, even in journalism today, it doesn't work. And I mean, it's so much more. The contents are online and are measured by how much people interact with them and comment on them and repost them and stuff. So it seems that, I mean, we talked this morning about education, that education probably needs kind of not necessarily the teacher to go out of the room. I might have been too polemic there, but it kind of needs to be more interactive for many things. Then again, I do performances that are totally frontal as well.
But
there's a tendency to kind of, I don't know, to make the audience maybe more at the center of the work and to make them immerse into it, or to be. Yeah. That's for some pieces. It's a good way to address them.
So you work in a collective. So I was wondering, what does working in a collective mean to you, and what's the value of working in a collective, and how do you work together?
Well, collective is a big word because collective kind of has a, it has its references in the 70s again, where kind of new ways of organizing, structuring, and things. We often just call it our label. That's more accurate, I think. But it's came up that we invented this label to kind of fight against something that was very present when we started working 15 years ago. The problem back then was if we would apply for a festival with a kind of, there was an open call, we would hand in our stuff and we would say to work by Rimini Protokoll, then we often got the answer, well, yeah, but actually in our festival we need the name of one person to be at the top. It's not possible to apply because for I don't know what bureaucratic reasons. And that has changed, happily enough, and I think here in Holland anyway it's not so much the problem because you have a long tradition of collectives working. So theatre making is always a big collective process, but it doesn't mean in that term of collective in the communist way or whatever, that everybody exactly has the same function and everybody needs to. I don't believe that it makes sense that everybody in a big team, when the team gets too big, then things just get stuck at some point. So, but yes, the three of us, we often like to create together and kind of decide in processes that I wouldn't even call democratic, because we often realize that it's not like we're three. So very easy, if you would not agree about something, then two would win against one. But it's not the case. It's interesting to observe that. We often kind of, if somebody really feels it's super important, he'll insist and really not stop talking the others into going the other way around until they agree, because he feels very strongly that way and the others are kind of rather not, but not fully convinced. So I guess what it does is that you talk longer. This is sometimes tiring, but often productive, because you don't go with the easiest and quickest solution. That's in the positive sense. But then again, we often do works where one takes over responsibility and it's kind of his name first, and others come in later in other functions or not at all. And so it's keeps always changing. I think it's more defining for us that we're working because in Germany you have this abyss between like what's the Stadttheaters with their ensembles, and we're not working within that kind of structure, but sometimes collaborating with them, but rather on a project-to-project basis, which here is much more common. And that, I think, feeds in at least as much into our aesthetics than the collective thing.
Would you say a Rimini Protokoll is like a politically orientated theatre collective?
I mean, we are. This theatre, this question, it doesn't really have a response, because it's whatever you say is kind of wrong, and then whatever you don't say is also wrong. It's kind of obviously everything we do is political, but also this is boring to say, and so I don't know what to say. I do observe a certain. I don't know. Do you have the feeling? And I got that sense a bit looking at what art school students now in your generation are doing. That there's a stronger interest, people say, in the Y generation, is it called? Are you the Y generation? Generation Y, I think.
The X generation.
No, that's gone. That was the one before.
Okay,
now
sorry.
you're the
Yes.
Epsilon generation.
I thought we're the Pret Park.
I said they were the millennials.
Millennials.
And some people say, sociologists, that the interest is stronger in what the family, what the strong personal ties are than the kind of bigger group of a collective that goes beyond the Facebook bubble. And there is probably something produced by those social media that they are social to the people that you want to be social with, but not with everybody. And that might create, I don't know, a shift away from pieces about... We've done a lot of pieces about institutions, may they be capitalist or government institutions, and I don't know if that is something that is maybe less in the direct interest of people in your generation, or
I don't know.
I don't know.
But then again, I wouldn't say that's the only way to be making political theater, I think. And anyway, I think it's more relevant these days to make pieces about the economical structures than about the political structures, because they're just more powerful.
I was also really curious about the ethical part of your work, because when I saw 100% Amsterdam in this case, and also the Home Visit Europe, I realized that there are real people with who we're working, not actors, but people who are actually telling something about themselves and sharing something of themselves, and also, of course, the statistical part of it. So I was actually wondering how you deal with ethics.
On a general basis, that's really hard to... I guess, yeah, as an artist, I guess on one hand you're trying to be, as a human being, you're trying to be ethical, and as an artist you're trying to be not politically too correct. And therefore make things... Yeah, I mean, there are big question marks around ethics. I mean, I showed a little excerpt from Situation Rooms just to give you... to give an example. There we worked with 20 people, and it would have been easy to just let the people that that are important, that they make their point, Amnesty International, refugees that have something to say about the impact of weapon in their countries, and we have them in the piece, and they're important that they're there. It was easy to find them because there are many out there, and they are willing to share their position, because they have they know that in the art, that they have the they have the victim position, or they can talk about victims in a way that kind of will be well heard by the theater audience. But for us, it was super important to have people there that are working with weapon also, where you, on the first hand, would kind of not want to listen to if you're, I don't know, well left or educated and kind of pacifist or whatever, and to allow them to tell their story in a way that doesn't judge them initially. But it was much more difficult to find these people first, call a weapon manufacturer and ask, can you please give me somebody that will tell his story, his point of view. In Germany they just hang up. In Switzerland we found some that were not so afraid of it was also not the first and everybody, but through some means we found some people that then were willing. Some of them needed to change their names so that their bosses didn't know that they would be working with this. We even had, and that was maybe ethically the most complex implication for me doing that kind of work ever. We had a killer from a Mexican drug cartel who was killed himself, I think 5 people. I don't know how much I can believe him in the details, but he was responsible for more murderings, and these are murderings not because of, there's a war and I needed to defend myself. It's murders because of I want to make money, and that's the way we are. And the guy, I wanted such a person in the piece, and I found him through complex kind of friends of friends connections, but throughout the work it was really kind of very complex ethically, because he doesn't regret. I mean, how to say, he's a nice person. You would meet him in a bar and you would start to talk to him, and he's actually quite funny, and he's a charming person, and you would not find out from the way he is until he tells you what he has done, which he doesn't obviously tell everybody. And then, we record this thing together and whatever. And in the end, I kind of felt like ethically, I theoretically would need to hand him over to the police afterwards, in a way. I mean, the German police where we were is not responsible for his case. And actually, there was a policeman in the play itself, and he heard his story, so he didn't arrest him. I obviously couldn't deliver him, because that was our deal. He gives me his story, and we even paid him for this. But it's a tricky situation in which you get into often, I guess, as a documentary or as a journalist. But I don't know if that's the ethics you were addressing. There are many ethical questions to ask around.
Yeah, there are many ethical questions indeed. Yeah, mainly I was interested in, because, for example, in the 100% piece, there are just so many personal stories, and I can imagine that it's quite complex, because I was just curious if all these people themselves just come up with a story, or it was a very broad question indeed. And
no, I mean, that's always a very long and nice process with all our pieces, to kind of find out what does the person have to tell that I find interesting for our audience, because not everything that they find interesting is interest or and we have very specific points why we choose people. It's also not that we're clearly not social workers in that sense, that it's not about the therapy for them, but often they're kind of in between zones as well, where people want to tell, or where people go and start thinking things about, or realizing things about themselves through the piece that they didn't know of before. So we have to talk a lot, and we have to negotiate a lot, and I cannot force somebody to say something that he doesn't want to say, obviously, and I don't allow them to force me to listen to something that I don't think is worth telling, because people are happy to tell simple stories about themselves, or beautiful stories sometimes, and they might just be the advocate of the audience, and they're the advocate of themselves, and in the end both have to be satisfied. But it's an interesting process always, to script that and do that, and it can go wrong sometimes.
I think it's quite difficult what you described. When I work, for example, with more community art-based projects, I find it sometimes difficult to not lose myself as an artist in the work when I'm working with others, and the work is about others, if you get what I mean. Sometimes
and you don't find yourself enough in...
No, sometimes I can lose myself as the artist in that project, because you compromise.
Lose yourself in the sense that you can't focus.
No, more as in you have a certain vision or an idea as an artist, and then you, for example, want to make a play with a group of people about those group of people, but then you kind of like filter down your own values or ideas to kind of, and you have to compromise.
Yeah, this often happens.
And then in the end, it turns into something you didn't want it to be, and I personally find that quite tricky always. Like, how can the artist stay present in the
Yeah, it's something that also keeps me busy, because since we started that kind of work, that times have changed now. So many people, I don't know how it is here, but in Germany also a lot of people work. There's even special grants for theaters to work with certain communities and show work, and I don't know how much money that was kind of spilled onto the market to make work with refugees, and much of this work is really very boring because the artists disappear. But I think the problem is often that I observe when I kind of observe such processes between, sometimes when I teach and students start working, they're very shy. They're kind of, it feels like they're afraid of the reality in a way, and so everything that is real out there is kind of holy, and they don't touch it. And I think that's is a problem, because it really, in the end, you are, as the artist, you're responsible for what's the outcome, not the person that you've invited to come in. So if you don't take that responsibility in the sense that you make a piece that you're happy about, fully happy, and that you want to show to the people, and you hide behind what might be the agenda of the person that you've invited to come, because you think, okay, well, she probably needs to tell that story, then it can be a real problem in the end, because then this communication process that you're responsible of in the end is not flowing the way that you invented it for, and hopefully you invented it for, and not the ground that was kind of there for working with communities.
I think it's funny that you said a minute ago that with like 100% that someone might come with a story, and then that you could literally then at that moment say it's not interesting enough for this moment in the play. Maybe another story. That's quite hard, like being able to filter out which stories you want to tell, which not.
It's highly subjective as well. I mean, who am I to judge? But I am, in the end, it's my name or the collective's name or whatever on the evening. But again, on the other hand, I cannot tell him to tell a story that he or she doesn't want to tell, because then they will tell it in a bad way, or they will feel not okay, and they will not come back to do it the next day. But it needs to be, for us, this project 100%. We sometimes get invitations, especially from the UK, where then we find out that they don't want to pay the performers because they have these. They're big in, well, let's make community work, and so they have, we'll find those communities, and then you have these people that are kind of people that like theater, and in the end it's kind of amateur theater people, and so they're not really the other in that term as it was addressed before.
So they really get paid.
So we insist that they get paid. If not, we don't make the work, because that's super important. Because if not, then they will come and I do it in my free time, and so I want to be I understand this. I would also feel the same if I'm not paid. It's. And I mean, they need to understand it's a work, and they also need to sign a contract that they're coming every day and that they do this.
And also, like, you only get paid when you're an actor, otherwise not.
Yeah.
But they are the actors in that sense.
Yeah.
Next May, Uncanny Valley will be played in Utrecht.
In Utrecht, yeah.
So actually, I'm really curious to go there.
Yes.
And also, to end, maybe I was curious if maybe you would be interested in telling something more about the play. So if people listen to this, maybe they get inspired and enthusiastic to also go there. Because, I'm curious, but I can't find too much information about it. So.
The video is not really edited yet, so we don't have the proper. But there's a trailer actually that kind of shows a little bit how this robot moves. So I mean, it is a play only performed by a humanoid robot, and this humanoid robot, it's a copy of this German writer Thomas Meller. He is an interesting person, not only because he has written a number of quite good plays and books, but especially because he has written one, and it's his most successful book, about his own life story, being bipolar, between maniac and depressive. Yeah. He was in psychiatry several times, he has been to jail, he has in certain moments really split up with everybody around him and slept on the street and everything, and then he got back into life, like he's really has experienced a lot, and that's the book about. And and we together kind of wrote this text now for this piece, which kind of describes the process of him being replaced on stage, not in his life. His girlfriend still has the original, not the robot, but on stage by a humanoid copy. For both of us, this was quite a trip I talked about before, literature being new for me, but also for him as an author being normally kind of invisibly somewhere. And but he kind of is happy to have this representation, because he doesn't becomes easily panicked when he's in rooms with a lot of people. So there's somebody that tells his story instead of him, and he looks exactly like him. Now the process was complex. There's a silicon kind of, he had to literally be for 1 hour under something that is silicon kind of, and he could only breathe through little holes in the nose, and then gradually, like, every hair was stitched into this copy thing, and then the whole programming of each of these 32 servo engines that make all the facial expressions have been a complicated process with the technicians together. Especially for me, it was complex also because, as I said before, I have this horror walkie in front of actors. The same thing a bit happened with the robot, because like I needed to tell him exactly, or programming when and how to move and when to open his mouth and so on. But it kind of is an interesting process, because so many art forms since the origins of the art have been about portraying people. It kind of is in this line, from the paintings on the wall of some caverns back in northern France, to sketches, to all kind of documentary portraits in film, to now this being a representation. So when you watch it, it really asks you. Well, I mean, there's a fabulous text also, but like watching this thing and starting to realize that you are able to feel empathy. And now empathy with what? With this thing that is made of silicon and steel, or empathy with Thomas Melle, whose story is kind of told through it, or empathy with yourself being potentially replaced by a robot at some point in the not so distant future. And then there's something about it that is, some of these questions could be just asked by a puppet theater as well, but as this all is programmed and kind of really literally triggered by one button that is hit, it's not only the robot is one button only, it's like the whole light and sound and video thing in the space. All technicians basically can trigger it and then walk out of the room. And this is still theater, live art, or is it not? Or so all of these things come together in this, I guess.
Wait, so there's two people on stage, the robot and...
No, there's only the robot.
Only the robot?
There's only the robot and the screen, and you kind of... Yeah, and it sort of, the format is a lecture, a bit like a masterclass or a lecture, a video lecture about his life. And there's also a moving light that plays a role in it as well, but there's no live performer going in the front there. Yeah. So come and watch.
Good luck with preparations.
Well, now it's already. I'm actually tomorrow. I'm going to Berlin to teach him English.
Oh,
that's random.
Well, the recordings are already done for the English. It's also the voice of the same author, because the voice that speaks, it's the author's voice. But now he needs to learn the lip sync movements so that you believe. So it's a robot that is faking to speak, obviously. So that's what we do. The lips, how fast, how much does he smile or not when he's speaking?
Well, good luck.
Good luck. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was Stefan Kaegi, interviewed by Janet Schreurs, Barbara Braniff, and Lotte Wandel.
Diversity Stories is a podcast by Studium Generale ArtEZ, edited by Fleur Bokhoven and Dennis Gaans, hosted by us, Mel,
And Henrike.
and produced by Onderkast. Subscribe to Diversity Stories wherever you get your podcast, and if you feel like helping us, rate the podcast on iTunes.